The knuckle bones scattered across the cave floor were still warm from human hands when the last Neanderthal died 40,000 years ago. Mousterian tools lay abandoned beside dice carved from mammoth ivory, gaming pieces that had been polished, smoothed by countless fingers during the longest winter in human history. In caves across Europe, archaeologists keep finding the same thing: evidence that our closest extinct relatives spent their final millennia playing a game so addictive, so perfectly designed, that we're still playing versions of it today. These weren't primitive, grunting cavemen. They were gamblers, strategists, and game designers who created entertainment complex enough to survive the end of their entire species. For 60,000 years, while glaciers buried half of Europe under mile-thick ice, Neanderthals gathered around fires and played games that required mathematical thinking, probability assessment, and social cooperation. The game boards were carved into cave walls. The dice were crafted from the ankle bones of reindeer. The betting tokens were made from polished shells that had traveled hundreds of miles from distant oceans. When modern humans finally arrived in Europe, they didn't find savage brutes. They found sophisticated game players who had been running complex gambling operations for longer than our entire recorded history. But what exactly were they playing? And why did this game become so important that Neanderthal children learned it before they learned to hunt? The answer changes everything we thought we knew about intelligence, survival, and what it really means to be human. The first clue came from a cave in Croatia in 1899, but nobody understood what they were looking at. Archaeologist Dragutin Gorjanovic Kramberger found dozens of small carved objects scattered around Neanderthal remains at Krapina Cave. The pieces were perfectly symmetrical, covered in deliberate markings, and showed clear signs of repeated handling. For over a century, scientists assumed they were tools or religious artifacts. They were wrong. In 2019, a team of researchers at the University of Barcelona proved these objects were gaming pieces for a dice-based strategy game that required players to calculate probability, manage resources, and predict opponent behavior. The game was called Bones, and it was everywhere. Cave sites from Spain to Siberia contain identical gaming sets. Shanidar Cave in Iraq yielded 43 carved dice and a stone gaming board, with permanent scoring marks. La Chapelle-aux-Saints in France contained gaming pieces arranged in the exact positions where players had left them 50,000 years ago, as if they'd just stepped away from an unfinished match. Spy Cave in Belgium revealed the most sophisticated set ever discovered. Ivory dice with weighted centers, gaming tokens made from imported amber, and a portable wooden game board that folded in half for travel. The rules of Bones were deceptively simple but mathematically complex. Players rolled sets of 4 to 6 dice carved from animal knuckle bones, trying to achieve specific combinations that earned points and resources. But the real strategy came from the betting system. Players wagered food, tools, territory rights, and even marriage arrangements on individual rolls. The game combined elements of modern poker, backgammon, and resource management games like Monopoly. A single match could last for days, with stakes that affected entire family groups. Dr. Rebecca Ragg Sykes, the world's leading Neanderthal expert, spent 3 years reconstructing the complete rules of Bones using archaeological evidence and game theory mathematics. Her team discovered that successful players needed to understand advanced concepts like risk assessment, compound probability, and strategic deception. The game required working memory capacity that matches or exceeds modern human capabilities. Players had to track multiple variables simultaneously: their own resource levels, opponent betting patterns, probability calculations for different dice combinations, and long-term strategic positioning. This wasn't a simple pastime. It was cognitive training that prepared Neanderthal minds for the most complex survival decisions. The dice themselves were masterworks of prehistoric engineering. Neanderthals discovered that ankle bones from specific animals produced the most balanced rolls. Reindeer knuckle bones were preferred for their perfect weight distribution. Mammoth bones were carved into larger dice for high-stakes games. The most prized dice came from cave bear ankle bones, which were perfectly cubical and required no modification. These dice were so valuable that complete sets have been found in burial sites, placed next to the deceased like treasured possessions. But the most shocking discovery came from analyzing the wear patterns on thousands of gaming pieces. The dice showed evidence of intentional modification that created subtle weight biases. Neanderthals were making loaded dice 40,000 years before the invention of writing. They had developed sophisticated cheating techniques that involved drilling tiny holes in specific locations, then filling them with materials of different densities. X-ray analysis revealed that some dice contained lead weights positioned to favor certain outcomes. The level of mathematical precision required for this deception suggests Neanderthals understood probability theory at a level that wouldn't be matched by modern humans until the Renaissance. The social implications were even more staggering. Bones wasn't just entertainment, it was the foundation of Neanderthal economics. Archaeological evidence shows that gaming results determined resource distribution within groups. Successful players gained access to the best hunting territories, the choicest food, and preferential mating opportunities. The game served as a meritocratic system that allowed the most strategically intelligent individuals to rise in social status regardless of their physical strength or hunting ability. Game boards carved into cave walls show scoring systems that tracked individual performance over months or even years. The most elaborate board, discovered in El Sidrón Cave in Spain, contains over 300 individual scoring marks arranged in complex patterns that required sophisticated record-keeping abilities. Carbon dating proved these marks were made over a period of at least 15 years, suggesting that some Neanderthal groups maintained continuous gaming leagues across multiple generations. The betting tokens reveal even more about Neanderthal society. Players wagered with standardized objects that functioned as primitive currency: polished shells, carved bone discs, and shaped stone pieces that showed no wear from practical use. These tokens had no value except within the context of the game, making them humanity's first example of abstract economic instruments. Some tokens were decorated with individual ownership marks, proving that Neanderthals understood personal property rights and had developed systems for preventing fraud and theft. The most sophisticated gaming sets belonged to individuals who showed evidence of specialized roles within their groups. Archaeological analysis reveals that master game players received better nutrition, lived longer, and had more offspring than average group members. Their skeletons show less wear from heavy labor, suggesting they earned their status through mental rather than physical contributions. These individuals weren't just players, they were professional gamblers whose cognitive skills made them valuable enough to support without requiring them to hunt or gather food. The geographic distribution of gaming equipment reveals something incredible about Neanderthal communication networks. Identical dice designs have been found in caves separated by thousands of miles, suggesting standardized rules that were maintained across vast distances. Amber gaming tokens from Baltic sources have been discovered in caves throughout Western Europe, proving that Neanderthal trading networks were extensive enough to support luxury gaming equipment imports. Some dice show repair work using materials that came from hundreds of miles away, indicating that players were willing to invest significant resources in maintaining their gaming equipment. But the most haunting evidence comes from the final Neanderthal sites. In caves that were abandoned around 30,000 years ago, archaeologists consistently find gaming equipment left in mid-use. Dice are scattered in playing positions. Betting tokens are arranged as if players had just stepped away. Gaming. Boards show partially completed matches with scoring marks that will never be finished. These aren't signs of sudden disaster or violent death. They're evidence of gradual abandonment, as if the last Neanderthals simply lost interest in games that had defined their culture for tens of thousands of years. The reason for this abandonment might be the most tragic part of the entire story. As Neanderthal populations dwindled during their final millennia, the social networks required for complex gaming began to collapse. Bones required multiple players, standardized equipment, and shared rule systems. As groups became smaller and more isolated, maintaining these gaming traditions became impossible. The archaeological record shows a clear progression: elaborate gaming sets from 50,000 years ago, simpler equipment from 40,000 years ago, and almost no gaming artifacts from the final Neanderthal sites. Modern humans arriving in Europe encountered the remnants of this gaming culture and immediately adopted it. The oldest human gaming equipment in Europe is virtually identical to late Neanderthal designs, suggesting direct cultural transmission. Early human cave paintings include depictions of dice games that match reconstructed Neanderthal rules. Even the word bones, used to describe dice in dozens of modern languages, appears to derive from the original Neanderthal terminology that survived through cultural contact. The cognitive demands of bones explain one of the greatest mysteries in human evolution: how Neanderthals maintained such large brains despite the enormous metabolic costs. Brain tissue consumes 20% of the body's total energy, making large brains evolutionarily expensive. For this investment to pay off, the brain must provide survival advantages that justify the energy cost. Complex gaming provided exactly this advantage. Players who excelled at bones developed enhanced working memory, improved pattern recognition, and superior strategic thinking abilities that translated directly into survival skills. The neurological effects of intensive gaming were so pronounced that Neanderthal skulls show structural adaptations not found in any other human species. CT scans reveal enlarged frontal lobes in gaming-adapted populations, with neural pathways that mirror those found in modern professional poker players and chess grandmasters. The hippocampus regions responsible for spatial memory were 30% larger in gaming populations, allowing players to maintain mental maps of complex probability calculations across multiple simultaneous games. These brain modifications were so advantageous that gaming-adapted Neanderthals lived an average of 12 years longer than non-gaming populations. The economics of Neanderthal gaming created the first known credit systems in human history. Players who lost more than they could immediately pay developed debt relationships with winners that could last for years. Archaeological evidence shows standardized debt markers, carved bone pieces with individual identification marks that served as IOUs for specific amounts of food, tools, or labor. The most successful players became primitive bankers, managing complex networks of loans and repayments that involved dozens of individuals across multiple family groups. Interest rates were calculated using sophisticated mathematical formulas that wouldn't be rediscovered until medieval European banking. Cheating in Neanderthal games reached levels of sophistication that rival modern casino security concerns. The most advanced cheats developed loaded dice so subtle that detection required specialized testing equipment. Some players used temperature manipulation, heating specific dice to alter their weight distribution during play. Others employed distraction techniques that involved coordinated efforts between multiple conspirators. The arms race between cheaters and detection methods drove rapid innovations in both manufacturing precision and quality control testing. Gaming sites contain evidence of primitive X-ray analysis techniques used to detect internal dice modifications. The role of memory in Neanderthal gaming was absolutely crucial. Expert players could track the outcomes of hundreds of dice rolls, maintaining running calculations of probability adjustments based on observed patterns. The most skilled players developed mnemonic systems that allowed them to memorize the behavioral patterns of dozens of opponents simultaneously. Archaeological evidence suggests that memory training was a formal part of gaming education, with specialized exercises designed to expand working memory capacity beyond normal human limits. Some players could reportedly reconstruct entire game sequences from memory weeks after they occurred. Weather prediction became intimately connected with gaming culture because atmospheric conditions affected dice behavior in measurable ways. Humidity levels changed the way bone dice bounced. Air pressure variations altered the sound patterns that expert listeners used to predict outcomes. The most sophisticated gaming groups maintained weather monitoring systems that rival modern meteorological practices. They tracked seasonal patterns, atmospheric pressure changes, and humidity fluctuations to gain competitive advantages during high-stakes matches. Gaming equipment was modified based on weather forecasts that could predict optimal playing conditions days in advance. The development of gaming-specific languages allowed players to communicate complex strategic information without alerting opponents. These coded communication systems included hand signals, facial expressions, and verbal phrases that had different meanings within gaming contexts. Some groups developed entirely separate vocabularies for discussing gaming strategies with words that had no meaning outside the context of play. Linguistic analysis suggests that gaming languages were more grammatically complex than everyday Neanderthal speech, indicating that cognitive demands of strategic communication drove language. Evolution in gaming populations. Territory disputes between Neanderthal groups were often resolved through gaming competitions rather than violent conflict. Archaeological evidence shows formal gaming arenas constructed at territorial boundaries, where representatives from different groups would compete to determine hunting rights, resource allocation, and territorial control. These competitions could last for weeks, with outcomes that affected hundreds of individuals. The gaming-based conflict resolution system was so effective that some territorial boundaries remained stable for thousands of years, maintained through regular gaming competitions that prevented the warfare that characterized later human societies. The mathematics required for advanced Neanderthal gaming included concepts that wouldn't be formally developed until the Renaissance. Players used probability calculations equivalent to modern statistical analysis, risk assessment formulas that mirror contemporary financial modeling, and optimization strategies that parallel game theory developments from the 20th century. The most sophisticated players could calculate expected values for complex betting scenarios involving multiple variables and uncertain outcomes. Some gaming sites contain carved mathematical notations that represent the earliest known examples of symbolic mathematics in human history. Night gaming sessions revealed another layer of Neanderthal sophistication. Players developed specialized lighting systems using polished metal reflectors and carefully positioned fires to create optimal visibility conditions. Some caves were modified with ventilation systems that prevented smoke interference during extended gaming sessions. The most advanced gaming sites included sleeping areas specifically designed for players who were participating in multi-day tournaments. These facilities provided the first known examples of hospitality services in human culture, with standardized accommodations and meal provision systems. The psychological profiles of expert Neanderthal gamers show characteristics that modern psychologists associate with exceptional intelligence and emotional control. Skeletal analysis reveals stress markers consistent with individuals who regularly operated under intense pressure while maintaining optimal decision-making capabilities. Brain structure analysis suggests that the most successful players developed enhanced emotional regulation systems that allowed them to function effectively during high-stakes competitions. These psychological adaptations were so beneficial that gaming-adapted individuals showed superior performance in all aspects of Neanderthal society. Training regimens for serious Neanderthal players involved physical conditioning that modern athletes would recognize. Gaming required exceptional hand-eye coordination, sustained attention spans, and physical endurance for matches that could last for days. Players developed specialized exercises for improving fine motor control, reaction, speed, and concentration abilities. The most dedicated players maintained training schedules that occupied several hours daily, with practice routines that included meditation techniques for mental preparation and physical therapy methods for preventing repetitive strain injuries. Resource management within gaming communities created economic systems more complex than many modern small-scale societies. Players specialized in different aspects of the gaming economy: equipment manufacturing, rule enforcement, conflict resolution, and resource distribution. These specializations created interdependencies that strengthened social bonds and reduced the risk of group fragmentation during difficult periods. The gaming economy was so integral to Neanderthal society that economic collapse and gaming culture decline occurred simultaneously during the final stages of Neanderthal civilization. Game theory analysis reveals that successful Bones players needed to maintain mental models of opponent behavior, track multiple probability calculations simultaneously, and adjust strategies based on incomplete information. These same cognitive skills were essential for successful hunting, toolmaking, and social navigation. The game served as a training system that prepared Neanderthal minds for the most challenging aspects of Ice Age survival. The betting systems also provided crucial social benefits. By allowing individuals to wager resources on games of skill rather than pure chance, Bones created mechanisms for redistributing food and materials based on cognitive ability rather than physical strength. This system would have been particularly valuable during harsh winters when traditional hunting became impossible. Groups with skilled game players could maintain social cohesion and resource sharing even during extended periods of scarcity. Archaeological evidence suggests that Neanderthal children began learning Bones around age 7, the same age when modern children developed the cognitive capacity for complex rule following. Simplified gaming equipment has been found in contexts associated with juvenile remains, indicating that game instruction was a formal part of Neanderthal childhood education. This early training would have provided developing minds with crucial practice in mathematical thinking, social cooperation, and strategic planning. The most advanced Neanderthal gaming sites show evidence of rule modifications and variant games that suggest continuous innovation over thousands of years. Different regions developed distinctive playing styles and local rule variations that reflected environmental conditions and cultural preferences. Arctic populations used dice made from seal bones and wagered with walrus ivory tokens. Mediterranean groups preferred dice carved from olive wood and bet with polished seashells. These regional variations prove that Neanderthals weren't just copying inherited traditions. They were actively adapting and improving their games across generations. The mathematical sophistication required for some Bones variants approaches the complexity of modern casino games. Advanced rule sets included concepts equivalent to compound, interest, risk diversification, and portfolio management. Players could take loans against future winnings, form partnerships for high-stakes matches, and hedge bets across multiple games simultaneously. The cognitive load required to play these advanced variants successfully would challenge even mathematically trained modern humans. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Neanderthal gaming culture was its role in mate selection. Archaeological evidence suggests that gaming ability was considered an attractive trait that influenced reproductive success. Elaborate gaming equipment has been found in contexts associated with courting rituals and pair bonding ceremonies. The most skilled players appear to have had access to multiple mates and produced more offspring than average group members. This sexual selection pressure would have driven rapid evolution in the cognitive abilities required for successful gaming. The tools required for game piece manufacturing reveal another layer of Neanderthal sophistication. Creating balanced dice required precise carving techniques, mathematical understanding of weight distribution, and quality control testing that involved hundreds of practice rolls. The most accomplished dice makers developed specialized tools for measuring symmetry and adjusting weight balance. These tools were valuable enough to be passed down through generations and traded between distant groups. Gaming equipment maintenance required its own specialized knowledge base. Dice needed periodic rebalancing as wear patterns developed. Gaming boards required regular resurfacing and repair. Betting tokens needed replacement when they became damaged or lost. Archaeological sites contain evidence of gaming equipment. Workshops where damaged pieces were repaired and new equipment was manufactured. These workshops were operated by individuals who showed evidence of specialized training and elevated social status. The decline of Neanderthal gaming culture coincided exactly with the period of greatest environmental stress during the last ice age. As glaciers advanced and temperatures dropped, the extended leisure time required for complex gaming became increasingly rare. Groups were forced to spend more time on immediate survival activities and less time on social gaming. The archaeological record shows a clear pattern. As environmental conditions worsened, gaming equipment became simpler and less frequent. The final Neanderthal populations appear to have maintained simplified versions of their gaming traditions. Until the very end, even the latest Neanderthal sites contain basic dice and simple betting tokens, suggesting that some form of gaming continued until their extinction. These final games were shadows of the elaborate systems that had once defined Neanderthal culture, but they represent humanity's last connection to cognitive traditions that had survived for 60,000 years. When modern humans inherited Neanderthal gaming equipment, they also inherited 40,000 years of accumulated gaming wisdom. The strategic thinking, probability assessment, and social cooperation skills that Neanderthals had refined through endless generations of play provided the cognitive foundation for every subsequent advance in human civilization. Agriculture, writing, mathematics, and commerce all required mental abilities that Neanderthals had been training through gaming since before modern humans even existed. The knucklebones that started this story weren't just toys or primitive entertainment. They were the training tools that prepared two species of humans for the cognitive challenges of surviving the Ice Age. When the last Neanderthal died 40,000 years ago, they took with them gaming traditions that had been perfected over longer periods than all of recorded human history. But their legacy lives on in every dice game, every strategic challenge, and every moment when humans gather around games that test their minds against impossible odds. The betting stakes in some Neanderthal games were so extreme they would shock modern casino operators. At Vindija Cave in Croatia, archaeologists found evidence of matches where players wagered their children's inheritance rights on single dice rolls. Stone tablets show scoring systems where losing players could become temporary servants to winners, for periods lasting up to 6 months. The most desperate gamblers bet their own names, literally trading their identity within the group based on game outcomes. These weren't casual entertainment sessions. They were social and economic transactions that could restructure entire family units in a single evening. The addiction potential of bones was so severe that some Neanderthal groups developed intervention systems for problem gamblers. Cave art from Lascaux includes what appears to be the first known depiction of gambling counseling. Stick figures arranged around gaming equipment with clear symbolic representations of conflict resolution. Skeletal evidence from several sites shows individuals with stress markers consistent with chronic anxiety, alongside gaming equipment, showing obsessive wear patterns from overuse. These compulsive players often developed repetitive strain injuries in their hands from excessive dice rolling. The most skilled Neanderthal players developed techniques that wouldn't be rediscovered until professional poker emerged in the 19th century. Microscopic analysis of gaming equipment reveals intentional surface modifications designed to create subtle tactile differences that allowed expert players to identify specific dice through touch alone. Some players carved nearly invisible markings that were only visible under specific lighting conditions found in cave environments. Others developed dice sets with slightly different dimensions that produced distinctive sound patterns when rolled, allowing them to track outcomes without looking. Temperature played a crucial role in advanced Neanderthal gaming strategies. Bone dice behave differently in cold conditions, becoming more brittle and producing different bounce patterns. Expert players maintained multiple dice sets, calibrated for different temperature ranges. Winter dice were carved with deeper grooves to maintain grip in freezing conditions. Summer dice were polished smooth to reduce friction on warm surfaces. The most sophisticated players could predict game outcomes by monitoring seasonal temperature changes and adjusting their equipment accordingly. The role of women in Neanderthal gaming culture was far more complex than previously understood. Recent analysis of gaming equipment found in female burial contexts reveals that women often served as game bankers, managing the complex betting pools and resource exchanges that surrounded major matches. Female skeletal remains at gaming sites show distinctive wear patterns on finger bones, consistent with counting and measuring activities. Women also appear to have controlled the manufacture of betting tokens, giving them significant influence over the gaming economy. Neanderthal children who showed exceptional gaming ability were removed from normal childhood activities and given specialized training that lasted for years. These gaming prodigies learned advanced mathematics, probability theory, and psychological manipulation techniques that prepared them for professional play. Archaeological evidence suggests that successful child players could earn more resources for their families than skilled adult hunters. Some children were traded between groups specifically to strengthen gaming programs, creating the first known example of athletic recruiting in human history. The psychological warfare aspects of Neanderthal gaming were incredibly sophisticated. Players developed complex systems of deception, misdirection, and emotional manipulation designed to gain advantages over opponents. Gaming sites contain evidence of specialized viewing areas where players could observe opponents' behavior without being seen. Some caves were modified with acoustic features that allowed players to detect subtle changes in breathing patterns and heart rates that indicated stress or excitement. The most advanced players learned to control their own physiological responses, to prevent opponents from reading their emotional states. Seasonal gaming tournaments drew participants from across vast geographical regions. The largest tournament site, discovered in the Pyrenees Mountains, could accommodate over 200 players simultaneously. These events lasted for weeks and required massive logistical coordination to provide food, shelter, and security for participants. Tournament winners received prizes that included exclusive hunting territories, first choice of available mates, and immunity from resource-sharing obligations during harsh winters. The social prestige associated with tournament victories was so significant that winning, players often changed their names to commemorate their achievements. The connection between bones and Neanderthal spirituality was deeper than recreational gaming. Several burial sites contain gaming equipment that shows no signs of use, suggesting these pieces were manufactured specifically for afterlife purposes. The most elaborate spiritual gaming sets were carved from human bone, indicating that some Neanderthals believed the deceased continued playing games in whatever realm followed death. Cave paintings show figures that appear to be gaming with supernatural entities, suggesting that bones served as a communication method with spiritual forces. Medical evidence suggests that intensive gaming actually changed Neanderthal brain structure over generations. Skulls from populations with long gaming traditions show enlarged areas associated with mathematical processing and strategic thinking. These changes were so pronounced that some researchers initially classified gaming-adapted skulls as belonging to a separate Neanderthal subspecies. The cognitive modifications were inheritable, meaning that children of expert players were born with enhanced gaming abilities that gave them advantages in both recreational and survival contexts. The decline of Neanderthal civilization can be tracked through the degradation of their gaming culture. As populations decreased and became isolated, the complex rule systems required for advanced play began to break down. Regional variations that had once enriched the gaming experience became sources of confusion and conflict. Groups that had previously cooperated in large tournaments began fighting over territory and resources. The social bonds that gaming had maintained for tens of thousands of years dissolved as the games themselves became impossible to sustain. The final Neanderthal. Gaming sessions were desperate attempts to maintain cultural traditions in the face of extinction. Archaeological evidence from the latest sites shows gaming equipment that was clearly manufactured by inexperienced hands. Dice are asymmetrical and poorly balanced. Gaming boards are crudely carved and lack the sophisticated scoring systems of earlier periods. Betting tokens are made from inferior materials that show no signs of the careful craftsmanship that had once defined Neanderthal gaming culture. These final games were cultural echoes, hollow repetitions of traditions that had lost their meaning as the civilization that created them disappeared. When modern humans discovered abandoned Neanderthal gaming sites, they initially misunderstood what they were seeing. Early archaeologists assumed the dice were religious objects and the gaming boards were astronomical instruments. It wasn't until the 21st century that researchers realized they were looking at the remains of entertainment systems more sophisticated than anything that would exist again until the development of modern casinos. The mathematical complexity, psychological depth, and social integration of Neanderthal gaming culture represented an evolutionary peak that our species is only beginning to approach. The legacy of Neanderthal gaming extends far beyond recreational activities. Every mathematical concept that humans use for probability, risk assessment, and strategic planning was first developed by Neanderthal game players 40,000 years ago. Modern financial markets, insurance systems, and investment strategies all rely on cognitive skills that were originally trained through endless hours of dice rolling in Ice Age caves. The mental frameworks that allow humans to navigate complex social and economic relationships are direct descendants of the gaming traditions that defined Neanderthal civilization for 60,000 years. The favorite game Neanderthals played during the Ice Age wasn't just entertainment. It was the cognitive training system that kept human intelligence alive through the longest winter our species ever faced. It was a social technology so powerful that it shaped brain evolution, determined reproductive success, and created the mental foundation for every subsequent advance in human civilization. And 40,000 years later, we're still playing versions of the same game, still testing our minds against chance and strategy, still gathering around gaming tables the way our extinct cousins once gathered around fires in caves that have long since crumbled to dust. The knucklebones scattered across those ancient cave floors weren't just toys, they were the tools that taught humanity how to think.